Welcome back to another episode of the Texas SignalCast. I'm your host, Joe Desotel, and I'm here with my co-host, Jessica Montoya Coggins. Hello, Jessica.
Hey.
We are here to discuss the very eventful past week in Texas politics, everything from walking out to defunding an entire branch of government to Trump endorsements, really kind of stretched the gamut this week. I think, the word, a lot of this has become national news, really. And so the walkout that Democrats did, it's pretty organic in a way. It wasn't something that was completely contrived from the beginning. It only became clear that they had to do that once it was shown that the Republicans were essentially going to ram this through. They were suspending rules, basically doing everything they could to make sure that they passed this voter suppression bill, SB 7, that was killed when the Democrats broke quorum. You actually got to talk to Trey Martinez Fisher, who was kind of out front. I went to that press conference. It was at midnight. It started at midnight, and I saw him talk a little bit about a national response, hoping that Biden was listening and basically saying we need to pass the For the People Act. How did your conversation go with him, and what did he have to say?
Yeah, it was. I was very glad to talk with Representative Martinez Fisher, who, he has been making the press rounds, really around the country. He's been on MSNBC. I think he talked with Yahoo News. So I was glad he also found time for our Texas Signal. But yes, he basically, described that this sort of and I know that you and David sort of went into this in length, that y'all's lost conversation. But the process of just the walkout and then sort of afterwards, this is also, I think, a really huge thing nationally that has attracted a lot of attention. And it kind of all stems from this bill, HR1, that passed the US Congress. It's also known as the For the People Act. It is a voting rights act that is kind of stalled in the US Senate, thanks to a couple of national US senators who do not want to end the filibuster. And so this is sort of the Texas House Democrats saying, hey guys, look at this really huge, impactful thing that we did. Now it's y'all's turn.
Mm-hmm.
Trey Martinez Fisher, I believe the phrase that he's been using is cowboy up. So that is his message to Senators Sinema and to Joe Manchin. So you heard it from him, folks. Cowboy up.
Yeah, it's true, and it's amazing how you see the impact that Texas has on the nation, and we are, of course, the biggest conservative-leaning state, certainly the largest Republican-controlled state, and so what happens here affects the rest of the nation for so many reasons, and we always talk about this in terms of education. Because our school districts are so big, a lot of the history books and the educational materials are written here in Texas, and so everything that we do here has an enormous impact, and millions of Texas voters risk being disenfranchised by SB 7. And I remember him saying essentially, we weren't going to be a part of our own demise. You're not going to force us to be here so that you can vote to take away our constituents' rights. And so what we're looking at now, of course, is the governor will put this bill on a special session call for later this year. We expect it to be probably in the same special session as redistricting. And I think this actually benefits Democrats greatly because this is an opportunity to organize. We've raised the awareness level across the country about this issue, and it's already starting to work. As a matter of fact, you can see that some of the Republicans are already clawing back some of the things that they've said and some of the things that were in the bill. They're so embarrassed by them. They're claiming that they were typos. I don't know if you saw this particular one about the souls to the polls issue. Senator Royce West is explaining to Brian Hughes, the Senate sponsor, that when you push voting to start on Sunday afternoon, the entire program of African American tradition of going to church in the morning and then immediately going to the polls afterwards is hampered and essentially made illegal by this new rule that they're trying to implement. And Brian Hughes plainly says, well, I think the intent of this bill was to make this an afternoon activity. And so just basically saying that, yeah, we realize that you won't be able to vote in the morning, but that's too bad because that was our intent. And then when the news came out and people started talking about, oh, we can't do souls of the polls anymore, that's obviously a big deal. Some of the House members started saying, oh, well, that wasn't meant to be in there, that was a typo, it should have been 11 instead of a 1. But
Even though they had the PM in there, so
right.
that's still a little
Yeah.
curious. But.
Exactly. They're not even trying that hard. They just, but the good news is we're seeing them have to walk this back a little bit. And it's only because of the bold step that Democrats took to walk out completely. And so that's why it's so important, and that we continue to talk about this. And the other great thing is that this is an issue that is not a partisan issue. This is not like, as much as we talk about reproductive rights, we know that they use that against Democrats in certain ways. When Wendy Davis launched her campaign because of the filibuster, they wouldn't let any conversation be about anything else other than that when she ran. But in this particular case, this is about voting rights that affects everyone, whether you're Democrat or Republican. These rules that they put in place will absolutely disenfranchise Republicans in Harris County and large counties all across the state. The idea for the Republicans was just that it would probably disenfranchise more Democrats. So therefore, in the aggregate, they still come out on top. So they're willing to disenfranchise their own voters to ultimately keep the power that they have.
Yeah, I've talked with some very prominent Republicans who are opposed to this. Former Representative Jason Villalba, who used to be the representative for my area, he's written several op-eds against this, pointing out exactly kind of to what you were saying. But a lot of, and again, the egregiousness of the sold to the polls. I mean, a lot of people were pointing out that a new law is coming into effect in September, which will allow any Texan to be able to purchase wine and beer at 10 a.m. on Sundays. I guess that had been illegal, which I don't know. I don't know exactly why you would need that, but who knows? You might a football, but maybe you have to be shopping or something.
Yeah. You can't buy alcohol like before the football game. You literally have to buy the alcohol Saturday night for your Sunday.
Okay, so
Super
but yeah,
Bowl
people
party.
are pointing out like, oh, great, you can go,
Right.
purchase wine and beer, but you can't go vote. And Representative Martinez Fisher also really highlighted that, if this does pass in Texas, this is the exact same playbook that Republicans will do, and they will march state by state to do this. So this is why people across the country have got to pay attention to what's happening here.
Absolutely. And we see this in Georgia. They kind of started it there. And I remember we kept like raising our hand and jumping up and down and be like, everybody's paying attention to Georgia, but this is happening right now in Texas too. And finally, it is sort of caught up and people are looking at what's going on. And I think we're going to have more money coming in nationally to register people to vote, to fight against this. This is actually a good exercise for organizations on the ground to come out and continue to raise awareness. And, the other half of this is that there's a lot of tension now amongst the Republicans against each other because of how the fallout took place. So you see the speaker taking tons of heat from the lieutenant governor, and apparently they're not even on talking terms right now. Now, this is the leader of one chamber versus the leader of the other chamber, who are supposedly supposed to come together in a special session and pass priority legislation. The governor is currently apparently not talking to the lieutenant governor either. So you have the three big people in charge of policy and government in the state of Texas who won't even talk to each other.
This
And
is like
so
Mean Girls or something.
it's ridiculous. It's that petty. And so, there is, yes, Democrat versus Republican on SB7 voting rights issues, but there's also the leverage that we're going to have just from the infighting and the tension that's going on between the leaders of the Republican Party right now on what is and what is not priority legislation. Because it seems like they were perfectly set up to come back special, ram this through. But the way the other two leaders of the other branches or parts of Texas government reacted basically galvanized the House members against the Senate lieutenant governor and against, to some degree, what the governor is saying and doing, instead of just against Democrats. And so the governor's response was to say that he might defund the legislature, an entire branch of government, for not doing what he considered to be the priority, which sounds a lot like bribery. He's going to like take away their paychecks. And it's not a big deal for the legislators. I mean, they make $7,200 a year. They all have to have another job, but their staff, of course, is also funded through it's Article 10 of the budget, and that is what the governor is threatening to veto. Article 10, which doesn't just include members and staff, but also the Legislative Budget Board and a few other agencies. And so it's unclear how he can even do that, if he actually can legally do that. He was quoted again just yesterday or today that he is serious and he is going to do it. So I don't know. Did you get a chance to talk to TMF about this
Yeah,
particular
yeah.
aspect?
He basically highlighted that there's probably a cafeteria worker at the Capitol right now, somebody who is mowing the lawn, a bookkeeper for a lot of these things. Like these are just a lot of the people that would be impacted by this, and just I think it speaks to the cruelty of this governor, that he's willing to jeopardize the livelihoods of so many people on this, and frankly, I mean, a lot of people who could be Republicans. So that's what he said. And it was funny. I just got off the phone with Representative Jasmine Crockett. We'll have a story probably early next week about her. But she was very funny. She basically was saying, like, all this session, she just felt like she was seeing Trumps everywhere throughout the Capitol. And then she was like, and then lo and behold, our own governor gets endorsed by him, and seems to be, taking on some of these Trump-like characteristics. I don't know if he's trying to compete with Florida's Ron DeSantis and like who can be the Trumpiest, but he is really, I think, trying to make a pitch for that.
If only he could. I think he would absolutely love to if he could compete with that. And yeah, some of the tweets and some of the decisions and things that he's sort of embracing, the very Trumpian style. We've certainly seen that as we move closer to the primary, and he's tried to stave off some challengers from the right, which we've talked about at various times. And it's very clear that this is Trump's party. And so what we're seeing is literally Donald Trump from Mar-a-Lago, Florida, basically tell Texas Republicans who gets to run for what position, where and when and how. And they are in total lockstep with that, which is pretty ironic given they talk about leaving the United States and Texas being independent and Texas making its own decision and fighting the federal government and suing Biden administration. They want no external input from anywhere outside the state of Texas unless it's Donald Trump. And then, hey, whatever he says goes.
I do believe he's actually relocated from Mar-a-Lago. I think he's out of the New Jersey place right now for the
Interesting.
summer.
I did not know that Bedminster or wherever his
I think it closes for this. I don't know how country clubs work, so.
Well, yeah, I mean, we know that Mar-a-Lago, that community where he lived, basically the tenants of the homeowners association was that he could not live there. But Donald Trump following rules hasn't really been his key hallmark. So, and the other person, there's been another announcement, of course, endorsement. Donald Trump endorsed. Well, actually, I guess he hasn't technically endorsed anybody in this race. He says he will endorse someone for attorney general, but he both likes Ken Paxton, our current attorney general, who tried his best to overturn the election for Donald Trump, and George P. Bush, who just announced yesterday, Tuesday, that he is going to challenge Ken Paxton. And it's interesting that he brought up the allegations, he brought up integrity, he brought up all these things that you could easily thought he was talking about Donald Trump, but he brought them up as reasons that he's going to challenge Ken Paxton. And it's just amazing when you look at the way these folks are willing to just grovel at the feet of Donald Trump. I don't know if you saw the swag that yeah. So for folks out there who hadn't gotten to see this, George P. Bush at his announcement had some koozies, and on the koozie it said, "This is the only Bush that likes me. This is the Bush that got it right. I like him, Donald J. Trump." And it's a picture, like an outline drawing of Donald Trump shaking George P. Bush's hand. So he's literally taking an insult of his family and turning it into an endorsement by the former president as best he can. I mean, it just kind of tells you where the party is.
I'm working on a story about this, but I don't know if you are that familiar with Game of Thrones. But this is very much for me like Ramsay Bolton. Like this is just a reek situation.
100%, 100%. Yes, this is. It reeks, and it is basically that. Yeah, he is. It's like Stockholm syndrome, Mar-a-Lago syndrome. I don't know what
you didn't think that another politician could debase themselves more than Ted Cruz. This was, Donald Trump insulted his wife, said his father helped kill John F. Kennedy, and then he turns around and campaigns for him and basically grovels at his feet. There it is.
Yeah.
So this is George P. Bush's attempt to debase himself even more. And this is, the things that, for folks that sort of don't remember, a long time, it feels like 100 years ago, but when his father was running for president, Jeb Bush, his downfall really came from a lot of the nicknames that Trump gave him.
Low energy.
Yeah.
Way to put the exclamation point behind his name.
I also insulted basically also said that the only reason that they use terms we don't use, but the only reason that, the Bushes like undocumented immigrants is just because of his mother being Mexican, which again, these are just, if you're willing to try and grovel to someone who literally insults your mother, like that's a whole other level.
Yeah. Mother, wife, hide your kids, hide your wife. Nobody's safe from a Donald Trump insult. But yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's just sad to see these people lower themselves to Donald Trump's level, and he's not even winning. I mean, if this guy had brought the Republican Party from obscurity to a Senate majority in the House, in the White House, but he's done the exact opposite. So it's just, I guess, from a winning perspective, it can't hurt that bad. But, even in Texas, I remember the polls in 2020, Trump was not that popular. I mean, he did worse in 2020 than he did in 2016 in Texas. Several points.
Yeah. It is, Texas was closer than Ohio and Iowa. It is, I think, truly a battleground state in that regard. But clearly there's parts of the state where, Republicans really hemorrhaged a lot of that because of Trump. And so we'll see. He has said he will make an endorsement. We know obviously how he feels about Ken Paxton. So we'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in.
I am curious to see the large Republican donors. So some like a Kelsey Warren type. His firm owns the Dakota Access Pipeline. He's a very, very big Trump person. One of the biggest donors on that side. So I'd be very curious to see what somebody like him, so like the big money folks, how they'll approach this.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, I feel like so far they've stuck with him. I mean, but who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I think what this shows is that in the state of Texas, at least Republicans still feel like the only thing that matters is the Republican primary. Mm-hmm. And that is a huge handicap in a state of 30 million people when that group is smaller, and more extreme as the years go by. And eventually that dam has to break. And we've talked about it quite a bit. What's it going to take? Is it going to take a Democrat with a lot of personality? Is it going to take obviously a lot of money? Is it going to take somebody outside the Democratic Party to kind of snap our state out of the fact that we don't have to be a Republican state? So we've talked about, a lot about McConaughey's potential run. But we have another familiar name that has announced that they're going to take the show back on the road. And Beto O'Rourke has just announced essentially a voting rights tour around the whole state of Texas, where he's going to be raising, I guess, hell and possibly money and organizing around this. And I don't know, what you've seen about this, but it seems like he's not going to just be hitting the obvious Houston, Austin, Dallas, but he's going to be going to Midland and Lubbock and Abilene and Beaumont and Lufkin and Waxahachie and Prairie View. And he's, I think so far there's 22 named stops at this point.
Yeah, I'm planning to go to his stop in South Dallas. But yeah, so it certainly looks like this might be the start of something. It kind of reminds me, it has that 2018 vibe, all the videos that he was doing from the road. So I think we'll get sort of the vintage Beto in that regard. But he's played such a huge role in a lot of the national recognition around Senate Bill 7, around voter suppression. My understanding is that he was really involved to get the Biden administration to comment on this. And, clearly, I think this has had a major impact at the White House. I think for a little too long, they were maybe not as aware of a lot of this stuff. And now Vice President Kamala Harris has sort of been put in charge of these voting rights bills.
Yeah.
So that, I think they've finally sort of awoken from a little bit of a slumber on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love to hear that. I didn't realize that Beto was instrumental in getting the White House to speak out, but I'm glad that that's the case, because that shows just how powerful Texas of a connection we have to the White House, and we're so important of a state. And even though we're not an immediate flip state necessarily for them, and we saw what they invested or didn't invest last time around, but the fact that they are listening and watching and investing some of the very valuable political capital that Biden has to talk about Texas is incredibly important for us. And we need to continue to push and leverage that and build off of that. And I think we are. I really think that I had several conversations with some of the key organizing groups over the last week. And I think that is really the spirit and the energy that everybody's feeling. Would not have happened if SB 7 would have passed, even if every Democrat voted against it. That energy, that fight that we have now, that we can build. And even if they do end up passing something, we have so much energy right now and so much momentum, and it's only going to continue to build, and we're only going to continue to expose them for what they're actually doing. And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And so, then there's the people who still need to be awakened, and that is these QAnon types who we talked about, and they just keep showing up. They keep going. They won't give up on it. There was essentially a QAnon con in Dallas. I don't know why all this happens in Dallas. I don't know what's in your water up there, but
it has been very embarrassing to see like all with Dallas plaster. And in the Omni, so I will say the Omni, because of the way their contracts are written through the convention center, unless you are like an illegal group, your convention will go through. There was actually a case a couple of years ago where an adult entertainment group was planning to do a conference. A couple of our right-wing donors freaked out and said, the then Mayor Mike Rawlings, you have to stop this. So they did that. But again, this group had every right to be there. So they sued the city. It was very embarrassing. The city of Dallas obviously had to pay their legal fees. They lost out on that conference. And there was just a bunch of very silly headlines. So I will just say, like, for folks that were really angry at the Omni, and, they don't really have a choice on that.
I'm glad you said that, because I was disappointed in them as well, because driving into Dallas, that's one of the first things you see. It's very iconic, the way that they do the lighting on the building, and it's always very festive, whatever the season is or whatever. It's really cool. One of my favorite things about the city of Dallas. So I'm glad to know that they weren't necessarily complicit in supporting that, or that's not.
And our Texas Signal did try. I did apply for a media credential. I did not receive one. That being said, I did talk with somebody who did go, and he basically told me it would have been very hard for you to just be walking, like people like
You would have been
most
spotted.
people. Yeah,
You would have been spotted.
most people were over 40. It's just he basically was like,
Yeah, you
it
would have
would have been hard.
stood out like a sore thumb. Yeah, but I would love for you to talk about what things that you did here, because the only thing that I really heard now, that the chair of the GOP state party was there, Ellen West. Also, disgraced General Michael Flynn was also there, and that was one of the biggest headlines that I saw, was that he essentially called for a coup and said whatever was going on, I think in Myanmar,
Yeah.
that should be happening here, and then he tried to backtrack that in the press later. But is there anything else that you heard
Well,
that
So
specifically?
Louis Gohmert was also
Oh
there,
God,
and his
of course.
office was basically saying he wasn't there, but he was. So, and I think that there's been sort of a question for Michael Flynn, who was our national security advisor, briefly, but
Yikes.
that was what he was. Was he paid by these event organizers? Or because that's kind of a question on that. And then the other thing that so there was a writer that I know who went, and he writes for I'm blanking on his publication, but he's written a lot for the Daily Beast, and I think he did their coverage there for freelance. But it's very expensive, a lot of this stuff. Like, people were coming in from all these different states. There was like an auction that things were being done. And there's a lot of money that is sort of being spent. It kind of reminds me of the insurrectionists that were at the Capitol, where, all that gear costs a lot of money, and flying things. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, North Texas, I think, was the largest place where people went to from there. So yeah, again, I don't know
Yeah,
what's in our water.
on private jets. So this idea that, yeah, the Trump, MAGA folks are all, disaffected, middle class, white people is just false, obviously. And because, as you mentioned, some of those folks from North Texas were literally taking pictures on private airplanes
Yeah.
flying to DC. So we know that that's just not the case. And I don't know if you had the opportunity to see the Q, I think it's called Into the Storm, or
Oh yeah, on
the
HBO.
HBO
Yeah,
special.
yeah, I did.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to go watch it. It's incredibly fascinating, and they pretty much figure out who this guy is, and he all but admits it himself. And if you don't have HBO, there was actually a great interview with the guy who did the documentary on the Young Turks, which is pretty much available on YouTube, so you can go look that interview up. But it's incredibly fascinating. And now at this point, we've really got to start to sort of deprogram these people who believe this crazy stuff. But it's very hard when, yes, Trump is not on Twitter anymore, but you have people like Mike Lindell and Sidney Powell who are still out there promoting this garbage, and people like Michael Flynn, and they're hosting these conferences, and it's the grift has gone from directly supporting Trump the person to just creating and supporting this alternative reality where Trump is going to be president in August. He's just going to be poof reinstated into being the president again. And so now apparently so is David Perdue. David Perdue will be senator again because they did
Oh, and
this
Martha
audit.
McSally, I think, too.
And Martha McSally, but I guess not Kelly Loeffler, who was also on the ballot in Georgia. So, it's just this stuff permeates and it extends well beyond Trump, the man, now at this point. And you see a lot of these folks basically trying to find ways around not running against Trump, but also still preparing to run for president. And it's, awful to see
And
some of
and
this.
I think the Texas Republican Party leans very heavily on this.
Hmm.
They have their campaign slogan. It
We are
mentions
the storm.
"We are the storm."
Yeah.
It's very QAnon adjacent. Obviously, Alan West was at that conference.
Hmm.
And I mean, I have lost a family member to QAnon. I think a lot of people have similar stories.
Yeah.
And I think there was actually some recent polling that about like 1 out of 4 Republicans do believe at least part of I guess, Tom Hanks is a Satan worshiping pedophile along with Hillary Clinton and a bunch of other Democrats,
Yeah.
so this is, um,
Yeah. Meanwhile, Matt Gaetz, one of Trump's biggest lackeys, is literally being investigated for sex trafficking of a minor at
right.
this very moment, running around at these types of rallies with these
Yeah.
people. Marjorie Taylor Greene is this co-conspirator in this, and they're traveling the country together talking about this kind of stuff. So it's really just it is scary to me, the amount of people that got caught up in this, and that we are still so far down this rabbit hole. Now, I don't think it's a majority of people or a majority of voters, but they're working on it with these voter suppression type bills, and that brings us all the way back to that. They suspend your disbelief in what can happen. They create a new reality, and then they use the power that they do have, which is most of our state legislatures, where the voting laws and rules are made, and then even, of course, the lines are drawn for these districts. And so they don't have a branch of the federal government at this moment. Well, I guess you could say the Supreme Court, but they have a lot of power, and they have a lot of influence still left to exercise to keep that power and to grow that sort of disease of QAnon
Well,
conspiracy.
elections have consequences.
Yeah.
We remember in 2020, we were hopeful to win or come close to a majority in the Texas House. That didn't happen, and this it's kind of, as we were saying, like it's strange that even though Trump is not as popular as you would think, they're moving so Trumpy, and it's like all these stories about what they were passing this session. The state is getting more diverse. It is getting less white. It is getting younger. What do? They're banning abortion at 6 weeks. They're permitless carry. All these things that just kind of wouldn't think would make sense if you were trying to build a party that would bring in more people.
Yeah, precisely, and certainly not leave the real big issues on the table, like the fixing the power grid and things like that we just absolutely have got to do. Um, so, yeah, it's we'll continue to follow the developments that are happening. As you mentioned, I did record a special edition episode on what happened at Sine Die with SB7, the walkout, the quorum break, and all that. The details, the parliamentary details of that, and all that is in a new pod that we just released, Texas Signal, a special edition SignalCast, and then as well on your podcast, Tex Mix, you interviewed Jasmine Crockett, who was one of the was the freshman of the year, I believe, from the Black Caucus.
Yeah, that wasn't for the podcast. I just
Oh,
we just talked for an article. Although I am gonna I'm in the process of recording new episodes, and
oh, cool.
she's phenomenal, and I think one to really watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's some folks that really shine this session despite all of the garbage that was going on. But so there's a lot to look forward to. We got to kind of sift through the rough to find the diamonds here, but they do exist, and there's a lot to be optimistic about in the state of Texas. And so, obviously the Texas Signal will continue to bring that kind of coverage to you. And so definitely just want to thank everybody for listening as always. And special thank you to our Patreons who support our journalism through a monthly subscription. If you would like to join that, you can go to texassignal.com, and at the top, click our Patreon and join that. We certainly really appreciate it. We've also, increased our engagement across social media. So we're so happy that, you have sort of joined this conversation with us. And that's what really this is about. This is about people. This is about a movement. It's not just about news. We're not just journalists. We really care deeply about what happens in the state, and we have opinions about it. And we want to help make sure we build a lasting, sustainable, progressive movement in the state. So, thanks to everybody for continuing to help support that. Is there anything else you want to say, Jessica, for this episode?
No, we're starting up a series at Texas Signal, sort of making the case for various Texans to be governor. We debuted a couple weeks ago with Julian Castro, and I know that there'll be plenty more people. I'm currently writing about Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, and our colleague Joe is writing about Michael Sorrell. But so if you have nominees, reach out to us who you think should be running for office. We'd love to hear it.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, one of the premier things that I think we all agree that the Texas Signal is great for is bringing out those progressive leaders who may be local to certain regions of the state and unknown in others, and to really get those names out so that every 4 years when we have these statewide elected office opportunities, that we know who people are around the state doing great progressive work. And it's not just Beto, there's a lot of folks, and I think he's done a good job of trying to elevate some of those voices as well. And so we will continue to do that. And I appreciate all the work that you do, Jessica, to do that. You certainly have really gone out there and found some of these folks who are like running for city council races and stuff, and brought their voice to a broader audience. And so really,
we were one of the first publications to write about Representative Crockett, because she was a special election, and she won. So I think that's one of the reasons I think she's also she likes to talk with us.
I mean, you get in early with folks, and they realize, like, hey, these people were there, and we're going to stick with them, and it just really creates this awesome sort of symbiotic relationship. So yeah. Well, thanks everybody. Continue to check out and follow us at texassignal.com, on Twitter at Texas Signal, or on Instagram, or on TikTok. And we'll be here again next week. So later, y'all.
Bye, guys.